Eddy, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for making the time to talk to me today, Eddy. This podcast is part of a series where I'm talking to various coaches. I think I told you that I did a poll recently where the majority, over 50% of people voted for coaching. And I think this is a skill that more and more there is a demand, there is a market for it. Now, before we launch into the subject, to go back a step, I want to know more about yourself, about what drives you. What is your why? Why do you love dealing with people so much? Or do you?
What drives me, I think if I was to somehow to draft a mission statement for myself, I would spell it out. For me, it's how do I inspire people to be best versions of themselves. That would kind of summarize what I am passionate about.
And have you always been like that? Have you always had this interest in
as long as I remember, yes.
Really?
Yes. Okay. I've always been interested in interactions with people, positive relationships, and just be there to ensure that people grow.
Do you find that sometimes, over the course of your very, very, very long career, do you find that that you're met with resistance sometimes? Do you think people need to be willing to change or work on themselves and want to better themselves?
Well, resistance to change is a natural kind of state. People do resist change. You like your comfort zone. You wouldn't want to take risks, Yes, I have come across people resisting change, especially when you change systems or you change, ways of doing things. People do resist because they feel threatened or they feel sort of uncomfortable. You feel stupid sometimes when it comes to daring to change, So yes, I have, but at the same time, it's part of the game. You know that people resist change. You know that people do not like change. So prepare for it, embrace it, and ensure that you win people into your agenda, because your agenda is theirs as well.
How do you win them, though? How do you win them when they are, let's say, defensive or they're wary of what you're trying to achieve?
Why people resist change? Because they ask the question, what's in it for me? Answer, provide them with an answer. Listen and communicate intelligently. A lot of listening and permanent communication. In change initiatives, you have to communicate all the time. Reassure people. There will certainly be some people who will lose out in the game.
Sure.
But make sure that it's done correctly. It's done professionally.
And when you talk about communication, is it a two-way process, or are you just saying this is what's going to be done and this is how you're going to go about it? The reason I'm asking that is particularly in large organizations, and we found that on the global scale with countries, democracy is not always a good thing. So do you give them the chance to offer their opinions or their suggestions, or is it just communication in the sense that I'm telling you what's happening at every step of the way?
By definition, communication is a two-way process, because if you don't include the element of feedback in your information initiative, you won't have a real communication process. But at the same time, I hear what you say. Sometimes, yes, democracy has its limits, especially in change initiatives. Sometimes people resist so much that you have no choice than to tell them, look, we have to move on. And fortunately, it's not something that is current, But sometimes you have to have that's what leadership is about. It's about courage. So you have to have the courage to say, look, game over now, we have to move on.
Yeah. I've been reading this book recently. It's called The Hard Things About Hard Things. And it's a book about all the decisions that founder CEOs have to take that, sometimes on very popular ones. So for example, if you're a founder CEO and you have to tell your best friend who you started with, actually, the organization needs someone else now, and you've got to promote someone on top of them or bring someone external on top of them. When you're having these hard conversations, do you find it hard not to get emotionally involved? So as an HR person, presumably you have to be in touch with their emotions. How do you kind of separate the personal from the professional?
But you don't.
You don't.
No,
Right.
you can't separate emotions from the rational. It's something that humanly you can't do it. What you have to do is to manage your emotions in such a way that they don't get in the way of your rational decisions. You were talking about hard, difficult decisions. I mean, in human resource management, in people management, there are always, occasions of having a difficult conversation, a tough talk with someone. But that's part of your responsibility. You can't avoid it, so you do it. And as I said before, you have to do it by being human, by being honest, and by being credible. Leadership, in fact, it's not a style from my point of view. This is my own opinion. It's a posture.
Right.
It's
And is it something you can learn, do you think?
absolutely, because your style, if I talk about style of leadership, it's something that, from my point of view, it's something that is static. So you have a style. This is your style.
So you're not capable of growth.
No. Whereas, I mean, if fire breaks out here, I'll take the posture of a tough dictatorial leadership to get people out of the room. I will not ask you for your opinion. I would not say, John, there's a short circuit now, and you see that smoke. Let us just discuss about what we can do about it. I will tell you, get out.
Sure.
Sure. And that's the posture I will take. Now, if there is something, an episode that would require that I am compassionate because the team is going through a tough time, or a member of the team is going through a rough ride, I'll say to the team, well, let us slow down and maybe have some attention for our colleague who's going through a bad patch. So the deadlines and things, we'll look after them a bit later. So I changed posture to be a bit more like compassionate, a bit more people orientated. You see what I mean? Yes. But it's not a question of style.
That's the first time I've heard of that, but it makes complete sense, because what you're saying is that it's fluid, because you have to adapt to the particular situation.
To the context. Yes, absolutely. That's what I think.
I agree with you. It's interesting, because we had a leadership series a while back last year, and I always asked about the style, and they always had an answer. But now that you presented it from the other side, I think I do agree with you, because as you said, in some situation you might have to take, be the tough boss and take the hard decision, even though they might not necessarily be popular ones. But at other times, it a different facet of you have to show. And you've been in the sort of human resources, human capital field for decades. Mm-hmm. How do you think the role of a HR professional, I mean, I'll say HR, I know people use different terms these days. Sure. How do you think that has evolved now compared to what it was, say, 30 years ago? Surely it has. I'm not saying that you're old, not at all, but it must have evolved.
That's fine. When I joined the HR space, it was about understanding and mastering industrial relations.
So
that's
disputes,
when I joined.
Disputes, kind of, right.
Management of the legal aspects of employment, dealing with unions, and understanding what are those conditions of employment, and so on and so forth. So it was more legalistic.
I understand.
Okay? If the word exists. And then it evolved into more a development kind training space where they start investing into people. There is the notion of investment into human resources as we start considering it as human capital. So it's got to be, sort of, we have to invest to get it to respond to our needs. And then that's when it took a bit of a strategic dimension. And we started talking about talent management, talent sourcing, business partnership, and so on. When HR becomes part of the strategic conversations, instead of sort of putting together a business plan and then at the last minute we say, let's call in HR and tell them that we need so many people, so get
Just
on to recruit, and so on. Now we are part of the conversation, we are part of the plan from the beginning, so that when it's done, you would then get into the execution part, knowing that there is one strategic definition, ambition, intent, and you understand it. You understand what the game objective. Plan is about.
Yes, and you have a say in formulating it as well.
Absolutely. So the importance of change management, the importance of growing talent, hiring talent, the importance of emotional intelligence, for instance, all of these now get into the equation. That's where we are basically today, into more strategic decision making.
It's interesting that you mentioned emotional intelligence, and I was talking about kind of the generational aspect with someone recently, particularly when you're working in huge organizations that have been there for a long time, some of them over 100 years. Presumably you do have a multi-generational aspect. You have a baby boomer, you have Gen X, Gen Z, millennials, and we all know that, for example, the Gen Z think very differently to what a baby boomer might think. Does that sometimes result in clashes, and is that a hindrance to an organization achieving successful change management, and who needs more coaching?
Yeah.
Does my question make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are two angles to it. The first one is conflict is inevitable because we are in a diverse environment, generationally speaking. You have different sets of expectations, you have different needs, you have a different mindset. Your purpose is different because, before work was like an end in itself. Now work is more a means to an end. You see what I mean? So obviously you have conflicts and you have, sort of confrontation and so on. At the same time, when you look at it from a different angle, the conflict is not a bad thing. It can generate ideas. It can enrich an initial idea. It can sort of generate innovation, creativity, and so on. So we have to understand how to make use of those different perspectives, opinions, ways of thinking, and ways of doing as well. Make the most of what we have in our environment from a diversity kind of point of view. So yes, conflict, but at the same time, maybe we should again embrace that and manage it intelligently so that conflict works for us and would become the generator of new ideas and new concepts.
Because, for example, I've spoken to people before. I'll just take a small example. I've spoken to people before from perhaps the old generation who don't necessarily believe in work from home. And then you have the Gen Z, especially in a post-pandemic world, who say, actually, no, I need to have my flexible time. I need to work 2-3 days at home per week. And then you have a third school of thought, and perhaps I'm in that school of thought, perhaps because I'm almost middle-aged now, I don't know, but who will say, yes, there needs to be some flexibility, but for example, I think that you can't teach culture remotely. Maybe I'm being too rigid in my approach, but I think in some organization, when you want to, particularly growing ones, when you want to inculcate a particular set of values, culture, etc., you need physical presence and you need physical contact. So when you have these different kind of clashing ideas, do you have to find a middle ground somewhere? I mean, is there a right or wrong answer? Or I don't know. I haven't.
I don't think there is, and that's probably what you're talking about is the hybrid kind of, the hybrid state. I would tend to go for the hybrid workplace where you have the coexistence of work from home and work at the office.
Yes.
Because you're right, I think, culture certainly is something that you don't acquire when you are, in remote mode.
Yes.
And you need it. And we have seen, in fact, after the pandemic, that work from home, although it's a flexible working arrangement, does not necessarily arrange people all the time.
Yes.
Some people have suffered from it.
Yes, some people have had burnout
Yes,
from working from home.
Absolutely. And some people have also suffered from the lack of interaction with others, with colleagues, with peers. So, there is no right or wrong. I think if we have a nice, intelligent mix, we probably will have the winning formula.
Yes.
But underneath all that, what it managed to teach us is that we have to trust people more now. Yes. We have no choice. You cannot just track. You have to trust. And I think that's something that emerged from that change of, having to work from home.
Yeah, and I think a positive one as well, as you say, that I think even though, you mentioned that you don't believe in necessarily in leadership styles as such, I think that if you are going to be the kind of leader who will want to micromanage everything and have control over everything, particularly in this day and age where I think one of the things that I'm learning from the Gen Z is that they want accountability on both sides. So the accountability goes both ways. So if you're going to be the kind of person who want to control and track their every move, they won't stay.
No, absolutely.
Which leads me to my next question. What do you think about the brain drain? I mean, do you agree that we are suffering some kind of mass exodus from Mauritius?
Oh, the brain drain thing. It's a reality. Now, again, we can analyze that phenomenon from different angles. The two probably more mobile resources, it's money and people. Yes. So, and it's not a recent phenomenon that people move. It's a choice as well, it's personal choice. But at the same time, we have to ensure that if we lose, because we are a small economy, we are a small territory.
Sure.
And somebody the other day was telling me, what's the big deal about brain drain? If you look at India, for instance, in the Silicon Valley in the United States, there are hundreds and there are thousands of Indians there, and India is not suffering from brain drain. In fact, I said, come on, you're not comparing like
talking about billions of people.
We are talking about, exactly, you're talking about, 1+ billion people, whilst we are only 1.3 million
and
here.
Declining, apparently.
And declining. Yeah. So let's face it, brain drain will not do us any good if it maintains this kind of trend. So we have to find ways of retaining our talent. There are a number of factors that we can consider to do it. Already, if you want the concept of patriotism, for instance, that could be taught at schools. How do you get people to love their country, wanting to stay? It won't make everybody stay, but at least you can have part of those people thinking of going. no, I will stay because I love my country.
Or to come back, to
Or
commit
I'd like to come back because I love my country. And then you also have the problematic of unfair recruitment practices, and we have to address that.
Meritocracy and all of
Exactly,
that. Yeah,
exactly.
sure.
Because people talk about that. People use that as a reason to leave the country.
And they're not completely wrong.
They are not completely wrong, So I think there are things to be done, because we have to be realistic. We cannot afford to lose, talented Mauritians. We have to invest into trying to retain those people we need for our future.
Should we be like some of the other very successful sort of island economies who have properly opened up to foreigners? Because I still feel that to a large extent we are still quite a protectionist country for various reasons, some valid, some not so valid. One of the things that I deeply felt when I came back 10 years ago is that I just felt we weren't particularly welcoming to foreigners in terms of job prospects, etc. There's always this tendency to feel that they are stealing Mauritians' job, but if the Mauritians don't want those jobs, then that's the conundrum. So what are your thoughts on that?
It's a perception. And where does it come from? If you look at expatriates we employ, the reasons why you employ an expatriate, it's one, because he has a level or a specific skill or competence that we don't have.
Yes.
Okay. And the second is transfer of knowledge, transfer of expertise. Whilst he's here, he would transfer his or her expertise to locals so that they can then take over. The only thing is that the trend is that an expatriate will replace an expatriate. So the succession plan is not done in favor of Mauritians. So when one expatriate leaves, he's replaced by another expatriate. So that's where you get that perception of, I'll never have my chance. And yet I can still shine in a higher position elsewhere. I've met with hotel managers in Dubai. I've met with hotel managers, Mauritian hotel managers in London, in South Kensington.
Who couldn't make it here? Who couldn't get the number one job here?
Because they see that glass ceiling thickening up. You see what I mean? When they look at the prospect, eventual prospect, they see two expatriates on top, number one and number two.
So they feel the best I could ever be is number three.
Yeah, exactly. And yet I have the potential of being number one because they recognize that I can do it elsewhere. So that's probably where the perception comes from. So I think we have to be intelligent about the reason why we employ expatriates, especially at that level.
Yes, and then obviously there are kind of other levels as well, because the kind of jobs that you're mentioning here are really the kind of number one, number two top jobs, but there's also that kind of middle ground where I find that a lot of people are leaving now, but I don't think we're particularly looking to replace them with expatriates. So we're complaining about having this sort of brain drain, but I don't think this massive push for saying, okay, well, let's see whether we could have South Africans instead, or Kenyans, or whatever. I'm just saying. So where do you think it's blocking at the kind of middle level? So I'm talking about someone who's kind of a mid to senior level manager.
Well, the push factors, it's a lack of meritocracy or lack of recognition and so on. The pull factors from those countries, like Luxembourg, it's a better conditions, salary, and then you
get to travel, you're in Europe.
Exactly. Yeah. So we have to be aware of those factors and see how we can work on them. Maybe we cannot control the pull factors, but we can certainly manage the push factors from here.
Do you think that anyone could benefit or should benefit from having a coach at some point in their careers?
Asking the question.
You're going to say yes, but if you weren't in this space from an objective point of view, having benefited from it yourself, I'm sure at some point in your life, do you think there is real value in someone, even someone who's not particularly ambitious, in having a coach?
A coach is not a magical recipe, okay? To start with, when somebody is being identified to benefit from coaching, that person must buy in the idea or the proposition. Otherwise, it won't work. But again, I mean, a coaching intervention should be quite precise. That is, you coach for a specific and precise reason. You coach because you think that my head of finance, whom I have earmarked to be the CFO, lacks some dimensions that coaching probably would help with. Then you would inject coaching. But otherwise, it shouldn't be like a
tick the box or whatever. Trend. Then you're just wasting your
absolutely
money.
Resource, money, energy.
Yeah. So, for example, if I'm looking at a junior person and I feel so junior, 1, 2, 3 years experience. So you're not thinking about them for a particular role, but you think that person maybe lacks self-confidence or self-esteem or isn't comfortable speaking in public. Do you think that's the kind of candidate that would be appropriate for coaching, or do you need a certain level of maturity, or at any age one can benefit from coaching?
It would depend on the receptivity of the person as well. But yes, some of those resources you're talking about, yes, they would be good candidates for coaching. Yeah.
What's the difference between a coach and a mentor?
Mentoring tends to be an informal thing, it's quite informal. It's I am not into transferring skills or providing you with a specific required knowledge. My gray hair would probably help in mentoring you because you require some
guidance in life, and presumably you could have several mentors for different skill sets, and as you said, it's kind of like a guardian angel guiding you along the way.
So I would have conversations about how to avoid the pitfalls, how to better behave yourself in certain circumstances, and so on. Whereas coaching is it's structured, it's formal, it follows a methodology
with a specific goal or objective in mind.
It's got principles. You have to look at the future and not never. The coach doesn't look at the past.
Sure.
And the coach is always listening, and will help you find the solution and unlock that capacity in you to find a solution. You develop your options, and then the coach will get you to find your solution.
So the coach doesn't tell you what to do, but would, as you said, unlock these something you already have in you, but just give you.
Whereas the mentor might
say do this and do that. Yeah,
would give you some advice. On a few things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Last question for you, Eddy. If you had Genie comes out of the bottle and you have one wish for the budget of this year from an HR perspective, what would that wish be?
I would invest in that. That's more, education probably than HR proper. But I would invest in job centers where you have people guiding you in career choices. I think Mauritius will lack career orientation. We don't have people dedicated to get you to understand what you really like and what you should eventually go for in terms of career. I think that's very important. Because
often I think even to this day, a lot of children are still heavily influenced by their parents and parents' choices. So, you go be doctor, you go be an accountant, you go be a lawyer. But actually no one, as you said, went through an exercise with the child to see what you're passionate about, which the parent might not be equipped to help
not
them.
necessarily. So I think that's a profession. It's
In itself.
in itself. And if we could have a network of those career guidance resources that would help our children from like Form 3, Form 4, I don't know what you call them now,
Yes, I know, it changes every year.
They've changed it.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah.
To start thinking about, what is it you would like to be eventually. That probably will help us as human resource managers in terms of our needs, of resources for.
And might be, who knows, might be a piece of the puzzle helping to tackle the brain drain scenario.
Yes,
because
and the mismatch.
Exactly. Because if you're in a job you love and that you're meant to be doing, maybe the pull factor wouldn't be so strong.
Yeah, I think so too.
Thank you so much, Eddy, for your time.
Thank you, Joanne.
Really enjoyed our
It's been
conversation.
a pleasure, really. Thank you.
Thank you.